a festive treat, a new icon to greet, and 40 cars to beat. It's December 1996, and this is Yesterzine. Last month, when we looked at the deceptively long-lived Commodore Power, I mentioned Craig Charlesworth's highlighting of genuinely short-lived magazine Saturn Plus. Craig remembered only 2 issues, bizarrely released 3 months apart. And it's understandable he thinks that. According to SegaMags.co.uk, Polygon even announced the closure of the magazine at that point. Somehow though, it re-emerged just 2 months later, then went to sleep for another 4. Then another 2. Then finally released a 6th and probably final issue early in 1997. There's a lot less documentation for us to crawl into on this than there was on Commodore Power, but there's definitely some clues about what went down, and as for our specific focus issue, we had to choose this one to look at just because we can't let this cover go. Despite the fortunes of Plus, and indeed the Saturn compared to its sister mag and rival machine, there's still plenty of, no seriously look at it. They've just jammed the nearest woman who didn't run away quick enough into a promotional tank top and given her what I presume is a couple of Poundland water pistols from an era you could still legally make those look realistic. Anyway, there's still plenty of new games. Seriously though, have you ever seen anyone look less enthusiastic? Still plenty of new games. Sega are bribing the festive purchasers of their already ailing console with a special edition, and producing a full remake of one of the possible reasons the Saturn didn't make the initial splash they wanted. And yes, we'll look at possibly the quickest cratering of a good faith magazine launch in history. But first, in the immortal words of Slade, does your granny always tell you the old songs are the best? No wait. Merry Christmas everybody, that's it. The Saturn, famously, never got a mainline Sonic game. An absolute madness of a situation given that this is Sonic at his peak. The generation after becoming almost a bigger platform game star than Mario, and following 4 games on each of the Mega Drive, known as the Genesis on Wikipedia, and history's greatest console. Nintendo never made this mistake. Literally every Nintendo home console since the NES has launched with something platformy and Mario. And it's probably not an accident that their 2 least successful machines came with the 2 that are least fondly remembered. Wrongly of course, when Galaxy is easily the worst of them, but obviously that's not what people were actually focusing on at the Wii's launch. There are multiple reasons that the entire Saturn generation went through without a proper Sonic game to call its own. A major one though is that there was supposed to be one, if not on launch. This one in fact, Sonic X-Dream, which was mostly developed by the American team at Sega Technical Institute, who, under the guidance of later PlayStation hardware designer Mark Cerny, had assisted with Sonic from the second and were entirely responsible for Spinball. You've probably never played X-Dream. In fact, other than some lucky E3 attendees in 1996, no one outside Sega did until 2015, when SonicRetro.com got hold of the source code and managed to make a playable build. It's a story of development hell for another time, but suffice to say, Sega canned the project around the time of this issue of Saturn Plus, reportedly just after international felon and also Sonic creator Yuji Naka had seen it and simply wished them good luck. Where was Sonic Team during all of this, you might reasonably ask, other than making sarcastic comments about the efforts of chronically overworked developers? Well, quite simply, they'd had enough of Sonic. So they were making a different game, one whose concept they'd been sitting on since 1992. That game, as half the audience already yelled at the screen, was Nights into Dreams, a game set in a dream world where all positive emotions have been stolen and can only be obtained by collecting sufficient balls, in a manner that makes me wish I hadn't already written a certain joke for this issue. Stay tuned for it though, it's a good one. As is Nights, it's not a platformer, but something between a side-on plane game and some kind of rhythm action thing? Even in 2024 it defies easy description. You need to collect sufficient blue orbs in each dream in order to unlock one of the 4 positive emotions. Once you've been through all the rounds, there's a boss fight to finish the dream itself. The game is designed that most people should broadly be able to complete it reasonably quickly. Nights though, is designed to be replayed, It's a score attack game, and this is where my rhythm action thought comes in. Knights is a game about flow. To get the good scores, you need to link trips through rings, with killing enemies and pulling off tricks without ever letting any of it drop. A C grade will get you through the game, but it isn't going to be winning you any prizes. Knights was the first game to use the Saturn's 3D pad, Sega's stab at 32-bit analog, and was even packaged with it. That level of control is pretty essential, as my footage is proving, because I don't own one. The replayability is vital. Knights is short, with each of the 2 playable children having 3 sets of 4 acts to themselves and a shared final nightmare. That's not its only failing. The worst to me has always been how zoomed in it is, which combined with the low resolution does mean I spend a lot of time not knowing what's going on. Learning the courses is vital. Still, at the time there was nothing to touch it or even imitate it. Saturn Plus had reviewed it already and given it 93, although even as a Sonic Team game their impression of its future value is expressed by getting 1/3 of a page review 3 pages into a roundup feature. Which hides that 30 years on, Knights is a rarity and that it's a game everyone should play and virtually all of you can. Because in 2012 a high resolution port hit Steam. It's still zoomed in, but it's clearer, and everyone on a PC has that all-important analog controller by now. This port, also still available on the Xbox Store, has another bonus, an even bigger rarity mentioned in Saturn Plus this month. Christmas Nights, essentially an extended demo of an early level, but made over with Christmas-themed stuff, including 24 themed presents. It's got tricks too. For instance, it uses the internal clock in the Saturn to add more and more Christmas as you get close to the big day. It's an entertaining rarity whose PAL copies will cost you more than most games, and you'd still have to find a 3D pad to play it properly, as I, again, haven't. Or you could spend £6 on that Steam version and get it bundled in, if you can unlock it anyway, which so far I haven't. Luckily, I do somehow still have the Saturn disc. Still, this has given me an excuse to try again. You don't see many specially themed holiday or event games and demos these days thanks to development costs, and you owe it to yourself to try the one instance of it based on quite possibly the most interesting game Sonic Team were ever involved in. It's a rare magazine that manages to have 4 distinct lives, especially with less than twice that number of issues. But that's what Saturn Plus managed to do. The first life is the least remarkable. Saturn Plus appears to have been launched with the best of intentions at the end of 1995, a month after its sister magazine Play. Skin deep, there's no reason to think either of them has a worse future than the other. Both share a design style from the front, both have a very healthy number of reviews. The Saturn even boasting a slightly higher number than Sony's Grey Slab of Joy. Scratch even a little deeper and there are some signs. Saturn Plus's demo disc contains only Victory Boxing, hardly a system seller, and its inclusion means that Play is half the price of this one. Even with that massive price premium, Saturn Plus has 68 pages compared to Play's 100, into which they need to cram 36 reviews. The preview section is probably more of an indication that things already weren't quite right in Saturn land. It leads with Johnny Bazooka Tone, which the official magazine would later describe as
300 hours of the most boring platform action ever invented.
Plus that would also appear on PlayStation and even 3DO. We know Saturn Plus disagreed with that assessment because their promised preview is actually a review where they give it 94%. Easily the best review the game would get on any format. It averages 64% in the ones Moby Games knows about. In actual previews, the standout is probably X-Men Children of the Atom, the first Capcom fighter to use Marvel characters and one that Saturn Plus would give 89%, and would be a Sega console exclusive until Who Won was beyond all reasonable doubt 3 years later. Maybe we'll give this issue its own episode because those reviews represent a perfect rundown of the first year or so of Saturn, to the point they cover 3 Virtua Fighter games and 2 Clockwork Knights. And it's a good list. There's some undeniable classics there, many exclusive. Play's lineup is probably less impressive. Very few of those games aren't on the Saturn, although there are 2 notable exceptions and we'll be talking about those later. Issue 2 next month will be a good comparison. Which is problem 1. Saturn Plus did not have an issue 2 next month. It doesn't appear until Easter the next year, where they've clearly pulled it in for a rethink for whatever reason. Saturn Plus 2 has lost the demo disc, although it still costs £1 more than Play. To be fair, at 116 pages, it's also larger. The self-styled Monster second issue features a complete A to Z of every Saturn game ever, the kind of useful but slightly desperate feature you usually get at the end of the machine's life, not what in theory is supposed to be the beginning. They're bullish though. Editor Nick Roberts talks a good game in the sidebar that would be a lot more convincing if he hadn't literally already left this magazine to take over from launch editor Dave Perry over at Play. 1996 is going to be the year of the Saturn after all. So, enough bluster. After cramming 36 into 68 pages last issue and 4 months of top-line gaming to catch up on, how many new games does Saturn Plus review in this gigantic double-sized issue? 17. Of which only 7 do they give more than half a page. Did they have a pressing luncheon engagement to get off to or something? For a machine you'd expect to be smashing into its stride, the lineup isn't super enticing either. Their lead review is for JVC's Deadly Skies, which even they describe as a mediocre blaster. Street Fighter Zero is welcome, but even they seem to have had enough of them. And with X-Men in this issue too, it's not even the only Capcom 2D fighter in the list. Nick's frustration with some of this comes out in his review of slightly forgotten shooter Gen War, where he says,
"It does look like a 32-bit game. Quite a bonus when you look at some of the trash that's been available on import now."
And we'll let Nick take his leave on that until some future where we grab an issue of Play. If you're wondering how he managed to edit Play and a 116-page Saturn magazine, then let me show you how. The majority of the magazine is that roundup of all the games since launch. First up is Sega Rally. The review in issue 2 is 100% entirely, no changes, a reprint in full of the 3-page review from issue 1. Exactly the same is true for Virtua Fighter 2, and our old friend Victory Boxing, and Baku Baku Animal. And, well, I think you're getting the point here. But to really fully hammer it in, the entire short review section of issue 1, all 14 pages, are repeated verbatim and in the same order here. It is astonishingly cynical, and it's no wonder our friend Craig thought it disappeared at this point. I'm honestly infuriated on behalf of the Saturn-owning public. The really bizarre thing is, though, remember that preview review of Johnny Bazooka Tone at 94% in issue 1? That's reprinted too. Or about 94% of it is. They've taken a cleaver to the gameplay and longevity marks, and
a visually stunning platform game with a rocking soundtrack, not all that original, but great fun,
has become
a visually stunning platform game that's let down by a lack of game testing and annoying gameplay.
15% have fluttered away from the mark too. What is going on here? Well, the review text is identical, apart from the last paragraph of both the main review and second opinion. We'll use Steve Hardy's one because it's funnier. In issue 1,
"It has no major flaws, and this certainly qualifies as one of the best platformers on the Saturn. Highly recommended."
becomes,
Its major flaw is that baddies can be incredibly frustrating to kill, and they come back to life. Try before you buy.
in issue 2. Add to this a review whose main text is about the game's development other than that hastily altered conclusion, and I think we can see what's happened here. This was supposed to be a preview in issue 1, and for whatever reason, the need for a cover game, publisher pressure, outright fraud, it became a review of an unfinished version of the game, and they made some guesses. At this point, it's a shame that issue 3 has been lost to time. Sources disagree if this magazine crawled to 6 or 7 issues, because if there's a 7, that is also missing, but we have the rest. I assume 3 was the start of the 3rd era of the magazine though, and we'll open issue 4 to prove that point. It still costs £4, but now, some 7 months after issue 2, it's just 32 pages. The entire staff has changed, except systems manager Alan Russell, who is celebrated by adding an extra L to his name. New editor Ryan Butt is still attempting to make fetch happen, claiming there's no stopping Sega now. He also asked people to keep those letters coming in, presumably to give him something to do in his spare time while editing a 32-page magazine, because after this issue, Saturn Plus wouldn't be printing any. Still, ignoring the price, there is evidence here that the 3 people it apparently takes to write a magazine this small did still care about it. They're making use of the space they have, cramming 22 reviews into this small number of pages with only the minimum of typoed game names. The Knight's review mentioned earlier is in this issue, but it's not the lead, that being handed to Fighting Vipers, another Sega fighting game conversion. That score of 90 tracks with its average pretty much everywhere, which is good, because at 9 pages, including a tips section, it's responsible for about a third of the editorial pages in the entire issue. Not even their highest scoring fighting game, mind. 2 issues after saying we'd seen enough of 2D Street Fighter, they give the mildly warmed over Street Fighter 02 94%. I suspect much of this is that this is one of those times where the Saturn genuinely had a superior version to PlayStation, even including some exclusive extras. Interestingly, and possibly part of some community service sentence, old editor Nick Roberts makes a brief appearance to talk up the very decent conversion of previously PlayStation exclusive loaded to the machine. I feel it's important to stress that Middle Era Saturn Plus is not a bad magazine, it's just a small one. They cram in the vitals, letters, hints, an attempt at news, and while there's just 30 internal pages, only one of those is lost to an ad. It's a house ad, the term for adverts for the publisher's own products, in this case an alien magazine. Predictably, this is not a magazine that can sell its back page, traditionally the most expensive advertising space in any magazine, which if you've ever wondered is the rationale for the community space that's been at the end of every Yesterzine since episode 1. So to the final era, and the issue we are nominally here for. And given we're spending a lot of time not looking at it and the page count, you've probably realised this is not going to take long. Tomb Raider Solution isn't a new game, it's the main feature of the issue, and in common with last month, the tipped game is also reviewed, along with Daytona Champion Edition, not its name, and World Wide Soccer, not its name. The previous impression of people who had a sense of pride in doing what they could with what they had has disappeared completely. Slapping a bored woman in a promo tank top on the cover is merely one of the symptoms. You look inside and are immediately confronted with an ad for a guide to PlayStation games, almost like they're trying to hint or something. After all, while this is issue 5 of Saturn Plus, play is nearly 3 times that far in and going strong. Even ignoring its recent reboot and a run as a digital-only magazine, it had run to over 250. The editor promises a different direction this month, and he's not kidding, but first let's look at what remains. You've already seen the entirety of the news section, because it's that feature on Christmas nights from the first section of this episode. Nothing else of relevance is apparently happening on Saturn. The promised 6 reviews all appear, over 3 pages, leading with Saviour of the Sega Saturn Tomb Raider at 97%. That's not quite as daft as it sounds. It's a little known fact that Tomb Raider was initially a Saturn exclusive, although the PlayStation version was released 3 weeks later and unfortunately is technically superior. Still, technically correct is the best kind of correct, and this is where you could see Lara first. Saturn Plus possibly overreact by calling it 32-bit's answer to Super Mario 64, but I'm certainly not here to denigrate the impact of Lara in general. The worst game is Mighty Hits, whose review begins,
"What the hell is this? I know we've been crying out for light gun games for ages, but to churn out something as naff as this is unforgivable."
And then we hit page 9 and the magazine is over. The entire last 2/3 of it is devoted to this, a guide to every corner of Tomb Raider, which presumably you don't own yet if you wanted to read a review of it. To be fair to them, it is a genuinely useful guide if you need it. There's full maps of the first 8 of 15 levels here, with all the important locations marked and very comprehensive instructions for how to navigate them. I would, in all seriousness, say to track this issue down if you're stuck on this game in either original form or the recent remaster. It's just you doubt the universal use of a guide that blows open a game that literally just came out. You get a break. There's another house ad for their Alien magazine examining the theory that the Star of Bethlehem was actually a UFO. I'd mock them, but they get a pass forever for that pun. All the ads are house ads. One for Play and its 15 reviews of some absolutely seminal games is a kick in the nads, especially when that still costs £3. And the one for Paragon's own website couldn't be cuter if it used the phrase information superhighway. Usually, on YZ, we don't know what the staff think of things like this. I generally try not to bother people by asking them to retread 30-year-old ground unless I happen to already know them. In this case, though, I don't think we need to. The staff has again entirely changed for this issue, but Brits, especially those of a certain age, are about to smell a rat at credits for Dave Lister and Arthur Fowler. While it's not impossible that Paragon hired people with the same names as the lead in TV comedy Red Dwarf, and one of English soap EastEnders' most iconic characters, it feels unlikely. Conclusive proof, though, comes with the replacement for art editor Mark Wynne, a man by the name of Mark Lewes. Yes, well done there, chap. It does imply that the inclusion of the woman who would rather be doing literally anything else is the art editor equivalent of a dirty protest. It would at least explain why she's pointing the gun directly at whoever's taking the photo. This shot has been lazily mirrored too. If you'll excuse the request, check out the boob area. Tomb Raider is backwards. To their endless credit, the conceit is kept up through the entire issue, with all 6 reviews credited to one of 2 TV characters. If we move on to the last issue, it's a similar story, even starting with another impassioned plea to buy a different gaming machine. Any different gaming machine, with a house ad for 64 magazine. This issue also appears to be guest edited by Peter O'Hanrahan, because...
Peter, you've lost the news!
Which means the Tomb Raider guide can begin even earlier, on page 7. Before that, we've just time for another house ad for another Machines magazine, including the sequel to Loaded, the Saturn would never see. Have you noticed, by the way, all these house ads have just been reprinting the Target magazine's cover? An indication of how much the publisher cared by this point. Just the 4 reviews, but Command & Conquer, Super Puzzle Fighter and Soviet Strike are all quality. I don't know Impact Racing, and if Lister's 85% is accurate, but Sega Retro's curated average of 73% probably tells its own story. And so we trudge down the death march of a briefly proud magazine. The guide continues to be well written. I'm guessing the writers enjoyed it and no one was asking any questions. Bored Lara pops up again to prove my point about the mirroring, as it's the same shot as before but the right way round. This is how I realised that, I swear, not by staring at the boobs. That was just how I confirmed it. As I say, there's conflicting stories as to whether there was ever an issue 7, but optimistically they claim there will be, and it'll be next month. But just in case, would you like to win an N64? We've had fun here, especially with their many crimes against journalism. But it's also kinda sad. The Saturn didn't do badly enough to justify this, and Paragon clearly gave up on this magazine instantly. It was a joke for 5 times as long as it was a magazine, between the blatant content reuse, the cut to a page count smaller than the instructions for your microwave, and then being reduced to an £8 tips book for a single game. And yet, at the same time, 2 sets of staff clearly were at least at some stage proud of what they did, and a disproportionate amount of it was high quality. Ultimately, this whole saga didn't work out for anyone involved, even including Sega. If there was one advantage the Saturn was always supposed to have over all competitors, including the Sony one they barely saw coming, it was the arcade. The 32-bit generation was probably the last one where the arcade had a big influence over home gaming, and it's probably not coincidence that it's also the last one where the arcades were at any point definitively more powerful than Little Jimmy's home game box, which was the original name for the 3DO. Sega, understandably, would expect to lead this. After all, they were king of the arcades among all the people who also made home hardware. Nintendo's arcade heyday had come and gone by this point. The Atari that made consoles had abandoned the arcade division a long time earlier. And to be fair, were also about to abandon both consoles and existing. Sony, Panasonic, Philips, Commodore never had a presence. And here's where the trouble starts, because the hype of the generation was that it would herald the arrival of the arcade-perfect conversion. There was reason for that expectation too, albeit with the help of a cart the size and expense of Wembley Stadium. The Mega Drive had a very good version of Virtua Racing, and the Sega Mistake, known in some markets as the 32X, even more so. So why shouldn't the Saturn give us arcade-perfect Daytona and Virtua Fighter? And what would Sony, the fellow late 1994 entrant to the generation, even be able to do about that? Well, as it turned out, two things. Firstly, Sony saw this coming. In 1993, they'd had a quiet chat with Namco. Arcade players would already be familiar with Tekken, and thus they were already familiar with PlayStation. Namco's fancy System 11 board it ran on was directly developed off a prototype version of it. And while System 11 didn't quite have the hump of Sega's Model 2, which was under the arcade versions of the two big hitters, Sony had just guaranteed a much easier path to the home for competitors to Sega's two biggest hitters, albeit with Ridge Racer running on the older System 22. And if you compare arcade Tekken with the PlayStation version, then it's bloody close. And the same for Ridge Racer. It's not perfect, but no one is going to actually be disappointed unwrapping a Ridge Racer disc on Christmas morning, unless they didn't in fact own a PlayStation. But this is Sega. They would make sure the Saturn could at least do an equal job. Hell, the Saturn was 100 currency units more than the PlayStation to buy, and the arcade machine of Daytona USA is nearly a year older than Ridge Racer, so they've had plenty of time to not make it look like this. If you walked into Electronic Game Zone in late 1995 on the launch of both systems in the UK, and they had both these running, then you would have to be a very, very dedicated fan of Sega's to walk out with a Saturn. And they'd very recently tested your patience massively by selling you the worst thing you could plug into a console since Commodore thought they could make a joypad. They had similar problems with Virtua Fighter, where the Saturn version is noticeably blocky and lacking in detail compared to the arcade. That game had the additional problem that the version on 32X, a machine whose best feature is being named after a description of your mum's phone contacts, was astounding for the hardware, and was very, very close to that on the next generation machine. Which put Sega in a quandary. Sony had their PS versions of Namco's too, and Sega's looked lacking. They made the decision to pull them back into the garage and, slightly controversially, issue remakes quicker even than a Last of Us game. I'm not kidding. Virtua Fighter Remix was launched in Japan 6 days after the original made UK shores, and was over here 4 months later. We're here though for the other one. Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition came along 17 months after the original attempt, and strangely, launched in Europe before anywhere else. It gets reviewed in this Saturn Plus where they give it 85%, but that's not remotely the full story. To judge the remake though, we must play the original. We can get one thing out of the way immediately. No doubt, I'll be pointing out some graphical errors and even some gameplay faults over the next couple of minutes, but the headline is obvious. Get past the aesthetics not quite matching one of the prettiest arcade games around at the time, and Saturn Daytona USA is a stonking game. No one would have questioned the graphics if we weren't at a generation boundary, and if the new hotness hadn't played such a blinder with Ridge Racer and Wipeout. It's also worth pointing out the Saturn has a harder job here. Daytona is running on more powerful hardware than System 11, and it shouldn't be underestimated how much trickier it is to handle 40 close-running cars in a race than Ridge's spread out 12. An oval like the 777 Speedway here is also a lot more unforgiving than nice curvy tracks. That said, the draw distance here is often abysmal. The fruit machine is there, but it appears noticeably earlier than the cliff it's mounted to. The stands and cliffs at the outside of the track appear to be located in a foggier dimension than Silent Hill, but without having the computing power to actually draw the fog. The thing is though, if you're looking at that when playing, you've probably done something wrong. The frame rate is more important. In this respect, the Saturn 1 doesn't match the arcade. In fact, at 20 FPS, it's 1/3 of it. But it's enough. The controls too, while taking a bit of getting used to, are the best attempt at making a full steering wheel into a digital game since Game Boy Race Driving'. I'll say it now, the drift mechanic works much, much better than it does in Ridge Racer. As a package it works too, because it's not a straight arcade conversion. The basic content of 1 and a bit cars and 3 tracks is standard, but you can change the length of the game, the difficulty, independently of each other of both the AI and the timer, and there's even the so-called Saturn mode that removes the timer completely and lets you get down to actually racing. There's no getting away from the fact it's not the looker of Ridge, but as a game, it is at the very least equal. Ridge has only the 1 track for a start, it doesn't handle as well, it's not as good a racer, and it's not like Ridge was graphically perfect. The comparison with Daytona hiding some sins of its own in terms of pop-up and cracked textures, especially in the tunnel. But when people expect the arcade game, a track mode is going to win, and Daytona's oval-based one doesn't compare. And so Sega made a call. Sega Rally had already been converted to Saturn, and it's simply brilliant. I probably don't need to tell you that. It's still not arcade perfect, but it's 30 FPS, it's massively reduced the pop-up, and it handles like dreaming about that time you had a nice dream about driving a really nice handling car. Members from that port were bussed in to help construct the new Arrival Championship Circuit Edition in order to fix these issues. And as you watch the intro you can see some success. Like Sega Rally, this is a pretty solid 30 FPS throughout. The graphics look more solid. There's less pop-up, although it's worth saying there's not no pop-up. And the demo loops are carefully shot to hide at least some of it. In order to mollify previous purchasers, some different cars have been added, although all still stock car bodied. 2 new tracks have been added. The resolution on this PAL version is higher, and they remix the soundtrack. You are probably sensing a butt approaching, and you're right. Because inexplicably, someone thought they needed to mess with the gameplay too. Sega Retro refers to it as having physics closer to Sega Rally than Daytona USA Classic. And if you're familiar with those, that's not the worst description. The problem is, it's not as good as that makes it sound, either. Out here back on the oval, you can see the improvements. The fruit machine is attached to something else for a start. But at least on this track, on the one relevant corner, drifting doesn't really work anymore. On the oval, this actually makes the game easier. I'm a lot closer to winning this race, and I'm certainly more consistent, which is probably why there's a noticeably tighter default time limit. Moving to one of the new circuits illustrated the problem though. It's not that it doesn't drift, it's that it's heavier, sluggish even. It doesn't respond quite what you're thinking it will, because you're thinking you're playing Daytona USA. You can offset this a little by choosing the quick controls option for the player, and while that feels better to me and means I can drift more effectively, it's still not right. That's what you have to get over with CCE really. For better or worse, this isn't really Daytona USA. It doesn't even have the iconic theme tune or a correctly liveried main car. This is another driving game which has used some of its tracks and game modes. Only some of the game modes, mind. Crucially, the no time limit Saturn mode is gone, replaced with a straight AI free time trial. That's a shame. A time trial without cars getting in the way is good, but they've removed the straight racing option. Saturn Plus say much the same as I do. They spend the review slating the graphics of the first and the non-Daytona-ness of this. They call it
a worthless update and shouldn't even be uttered in the same sentence as Daytona.
but also,
A game that looks and plays very well in its own right.
and the thing is that's it. I really wish they'd left Daytona to it and made this a new game based on, I don't know, road supercars maybe? Sega Porsche Challenge or something? Because I think then it would be fondly remembered, whereas now it's just the worst version of Daytona. Weirdly though, that's left it with a reason to exist. It's still a good driving game, and those 2 tracks only exist here and in the Take It or Leave It Dreamcast Daytona. This is a unique experience that might be worth it. The original is the better Daytona, but it's only the best Daytona if a Saturn is all you have. The 2011 arcade remaster for the PS3 and Xbox 360 is an absolutely perfect arcade port, with 8-player multiplayer and a choice of soundtrack. Unlike Knights earlier, the 360 version works with all later Xboxen. If you're a machine agnostic gamer, that's what you should be playing. But you won't be getting everything CCE has. If a Saturn is all you have, buy both, they're cheap. Buy the original attempt first though. On the back page, it's us. Wait, hold up, reverse. On the back page, did that feature on Sega arcade games leave you pining for Virtua Racing but with more HD-ness, more cars, and more being on Steam? Then might I interest you in the impending early access release of Super Polygon Grand Prix, the arcade racing game that's even more Virtua Racing than Virtua Racing. Virtua Racing, if you will. Sliding into your Steam on July the 30th, Super Polygon Grand Prix features blue skies, black tracks, huge fields of AI, and the ability to quite literally put it in H. I've been looking forward to this one since I played an impossibly early build some considerable time ago, and I've watched it look better and better with every video since. And where else are you going to race past a large sign reading Yesterzine unless you graffiti a barrier on the M40, then drive past it at illegal speeds? And that's just committing multiple crimes for which the fines add up to hundreds of times the cost of a fine Sega-esque arcade driving game. It just makes sense. And what also makes sense is joining us next month when we discover what a magazine does when the format it covers is dead, but the format it wants to cover doesn't really yet exist. As they say in Daytona USA, go away.